Hello again for the second time in 2 days. Today we're going to be doing something a bit different than yesterday. We're doing some computing. It's on programming because I've got a test on this soon and I know some other people have, so might as well share it. So programming, what's the first thing we need to do about this topic? So there's variables. So there's lots of different types of variables. And basically variables are things that can change and can change within the program. So one of the variables is called an integer, and that is one that has a whole number value. Another one is a char or character, which is a single ASCII character, so it only has one character in its value. Another one is a float/real, which is a number similar to the integer, but it has a decimal value, so it has things after the decimal point. It has a boolean, which is a true or false value. So it's either true or false, and that can affect the outcome of things in a program and be used for that and what happens in it. So, and then there's a string, which is 0 or more characters that are just saved as characters. We'll get on to more about strings later, as that is a big thing. Also, dim means declare in memory, and that's what you use before making a variable. So you would declare in memory the name of the variable, and you say as one of these things, as integer, as char, as float/real. So how you would save a variable into something is you could say variable1 equals console.readline, and that means you're reading in what someone's inputted. So if you write line something out like enter your name, then you readlined it in as the variable, that would save inside of it. So next we're going to go on to selection. So selection is lines of code that only run if a condition is met. And if this condition isn't met, as it says here, otherwise code skips it all. So it skips all the lines inside the loop if this condition isn't met. So look at the word if. So it's basically if statements, which is a conditional statement. So if something is there, it will go through the code. Else it will skip. That's the thing. That's what else does. You can add else for if not. So it gives an alternate thing. So if it's not, then do this instead. Then obviously you put an end if at the end of all this to end the actual loop. But that would be a separate part and would do the opposite if it wasn't the if. You could always have an else if inside of it as well, which would have the same impact as an if but go after the if that makes sense. So next let's go into loops. There's two types of loops, fixed loops and conditional loops. So a fixed loop is a loop that repeats a specific amount of times that the programmer sets up. So it uses the thing for next. So for next, so for I equals 1 to 7. And then you'd have I incrementing itself by 1, increasing itself by 1 every time. So it would overall repeat 7 times. As I went from 1 to 7. And the programmer is the person who controls this. This isn't affected by anything actually inside the program. The next type of loop we're going to look at is a conditional loop. So a conditional loop relies on a condition being true or false. So the loop repeats itself until a condition is met. And we don't know how many times it will be until it's met. So one of the main examples of this is a do until loop. So it basically, the condition gets tested at the end of the loop and it has to run through at least once to know that. So until a equals 10, you would have that at the end of your loop, at the end of after the do would be the instruction, and then until a equals 10. So it repeats until a equals 10, until the condition is true. So if a doesn't equal 10, it will keep running continuously until a becomes 10. Which can lead to us getting a problem if a will never equal 10. That would make a loop that never ends, which is not good and can result in an error. But as long as a at some point will equal 10, then it will end. Then another type of conditional loop is the while end while loop. So it's while number. So for my example, I've got while numbers bigger than 0. So that will only execute this actual what is within this loop if the number is bigger than 0. If the variable known as number is bigger than 0, it continues to execute if it stays as that. So it will keep happening if the number doesn't go under 0. If the number doesn't go under 0, it will keep happening. So the condition is tested at the start of the loop. As you can see, the while is at the start. Sometimes it will never execute. Because if it's never the first statement that's a while, then why would it bother executing at all? So the next bit we're going to go into is arrays. So what are arrays? An array is basically a data structure that allows you to hold several variables, all of the same type, within one name. You can only use one type of variable, so it would be one of these. Well, I think only a few of these work, or at least that's what we've done so far. Like, you can have an array of integers, an array of strings, and an array of chars, I think I've got so far. So basically, this holds them all in one place. So if you dim numbers 4 as integer, that would dim... It wouldn't dim 4, it would dim 5, I believe, because the index always starts at 0. But these values you'd be allowed to put in later. And here, yeah, if you dim numbers equals new integer as 1, 2, 4, and 8, then you're actually setting them at the beginning. And if you do this, then you got this thing called index. So it starts at 0. And the index shows the position of a value in an array. So as we see, it starts at 0 because 0 is considered the first number in binary, as it's a base 2 system. So computers always think as 0 as an actual value digit. So basically, if we look in this, value number 0 would be 1. Values number 1 would be 2 because it's the second. 4 is the third, which will make it 2. And 8 is the fourth, which will make it 3. So that's basically how that bit works. And 2D arrays, sort of like a table. So that if we look at this table here, there's rows and columns. So those are all the variable types. Those are the different rows. So if we're looking for 2, 3, as you can see here, you always go down first, then across. So if we're looking for 2, 3, we'd go down 3 and across 4. And this is because it always starts at 0. Say we were looking for 0, 1, we go down to the first one and across 1, 2. That's how we'd find it. So that's basically how that works. It's similar to how you would do something on a graph. You go, except this time you go down and across, which is interesting. You probably need to remember how to figure out the indexes on that. So next, let's go into more stuff about strings. Strings are very important. So a string could basically be defined as an array of characters. It's literally just a load of characters. Say this word revision I've got here, it's got an index of 0 to 7. That's all the individual values in it. Because that's all it really is. It's just a load of characters stored together in one thing. So a few things you can use to get different stuff out of it is string.length, character amount, which would give you the character amount. So revision has 8 characters in it, despite its index only going up to 7, and as we know, 0. That's how that works. So a few other things you could do is string.insert, which would have index and then the value in brackets after it. So basically it would add a value in at that index. So this value you put here, it would add it in at this index. So the next thing is string.contains value. So basically you could say string.contains and then put whatever for the value, and it would test whether within that string the value's actually there, and it would give you a response that was either true or false, and then you could then use it to change things, or use it to always just output it to the user to see whether what they are looking for is there or not, which could be very useful. Another thing is string.substring index length. So that saves a copy of string length after index as a variable. So basically, the place as an index you put in, it will save the stuff after that for the length that you say. So it will go that length of characters after what you type in as an index, and it would copy all of that, and you could save that as a different variable, and you could always translate somewhere else or put it in somewhere else, which is good because you can always use it with the add in. You could take it out as a substring and then add it in to somewhere else. You can always use these string things at different times for the same thing. Say you had 2 strings, you could take it out of one and into another, which is, when you get to combining these things, it gets really interesting. So then string.remove index, so that removes all after an index. So you type in the index, say you typed in for this 3, that would get rid of every letter after 3, so that would get rid of all of that, and you'd just be stuck with the first 4 letters. So basically it removes everything after that index number. And string.indexOf and value gives values index in a string. So if you wanted to know the index of capital E, then you'd have to ask it index of in those speech marks E, and it would give you back 1. It would tell you the index of the place in the actual array. So yeah, it's an array of characters, and you can use all these things to go with it. Also, spaces are always counted as characters, and that's an important thing to remember, especially in tests, because they'll often try and trip you up with that sort of thing, especially in multiple choice questions where they'll have one that's less than what it is and one that's more than it is, because you remember the 0 in the index. There's always a 0 in the index as 1, and spaces are always characters. That's important things to remember. So that was programming. I think that's probably my first computer thing that wasn't some random PowerPoint. So thank you and goodbye.